In 2020, a deadly virus wipes out the entire population of Earth, except one man, Phil Miller. Believing himself to be the last man alive, Phil spends a year traveling across every state in the United States, searching for any sign of human life and marking each place off on a map. Along the way, he casually loots museums, stuffing his bus with expensive paintings and anything valuable he can find. Despite a year of searching, he finds no signs of human existence. However, he writes "Alive in Tucson" on various billboards across the country, hoping someone somewhere might see them. He then returns to his hometown Tucson, picks the biggest and most luxurious house he can find, and decorates it with all the stolen art. At night, he misses his family, and apologizes to God for all the masturbation he has done over the past year, and desperately begs for just one girl so he doesn't feel lonely. With no one left to stop him, Phil does whatever he wants. He goes shopping in his underwear, breaks into stores, knocks over a pyramid of cans with his cart for no reason, and fills his cart with expensive wine and adult movies. On his way home, he even stares a little too long at a mannequin with pure lust, because women and sex is pretty much all he thinks about now. To kill time, he does all the stupid things a man can do, like knocking over lamplights, smashing fish tanks with bowling balls, and even blowing up luxury cars just for fun.
Oh, yes! Yes!
On his birthday, Phil cuts a cake by himself, thinks about his family, and once again blames God for leaving him like this, and begs for just one woman to show up. Just like that, 5 months pass, and Phil's home turns into a complete junkyard, his life just as miserable. He's drunk all the time and has completely given up on cleanliness. He swims in alcohol, shits in the pool, and thinks about sex all the time. Desperate for some kind of connection, he even creates ball friends and talks to them as if they're real people. At night, Phil and his favorite ball Gary sit together, staring at the mannequin he's developed a crush on. Tonight, he finally decides to confess his feelings. He walks out and shoots the glass with a gun. He enters inside and expresses his feelings to the mannequin before reluctantly kissing her lips. But the moment he grabs her hand, it snaps off, and just like that, so does his illusion. His heart breaks as the harsh reality sinks in. He is truly alone in this entire world. Not able to take it anymore, Phil decides to delete himself the next day, and writes his name and the date onto a large rock. He thanks all his ball friends for being with him and listening to his yap all this time. He says goodbye to them, gets into his car, and speeds straight toward the rock, ready to finish it. But at the very last moment, something catches his eye, forcing him to slam the brakes and stop. Stepping out of the car, he notices smoke rising in the distance, and for the first time in a long while, he dares to believe that maybe there's someone else in this world besides him. He immediately rushes toward the smoke trail in his car, and when he arrives, he finds women's clothes hanging out to dry. He picks up a bra and starts sniffing it, with tears of joy running down his face, and then suddenly passes out. In his dream, Phil finds himself lying in the lap of a really beautiful girl who starts kissing him. But the moment he opens his eyes, he finds a rather unattractive middle-aged woman giving him mouth-to-mouth. Startled, he instantly jumps back and asks her where the beautiful girl went. She explains that she was just trying to save his life because he passed out, and casually tells him to check his underpants, which are wet. Phil refuses to accept that he wet his underpants and starts walking toward her in denial. Seeing that, she pulls out a gun on him. Phil immediately switches up and admits that he did in fact wet his underpants. Following that, she introduces herself as Carol and says she came here after seeing those "Alive in Tucson" billboards. Even though Phil was desperate for a woman and blamed God every single day, now that she's actually sitting in front of him, he doesn't seem that interested at all. One reason is that Carol is annoying as hell. She talks incessantly, keeps correcting his grammar, and when Phil takes her home, she even makes him follow traffic rules even though there's no one left on Earth except the two of them. After reaching home, Carol is shocked by how Phil lives. He has 2 swimming pools, one filled with floating turds because he used to dump in it, and the other used as a garbage pit. Even his house is a complete mess, covered in plastic bottles, cans, and all kinds of trash. Carol also notices the expensive paintings and immediately calls him out for stealing them, but Phil tells her that he takes good care of them. Carol also notices a bunch of adult magazines lying around and says that if he had used even 1% of his masturbation energy to fix his toilet pipes, he wouldn't have to live like an animal and shit in the pool. However, Phil finds it pretty offensive and drops her back at her campsite. The next morning, when Phil wakes up, he finds Carol cleaning his house and gets upset, saying she should ask the owner before cleaning his house. So Carol starts throwing the trash back out of the bags. Following that, they both go to the supermarket, and Phil just randomly parks the car right in front of the store. Carol tells him that it's not a parking spot and that he should park at the parking spot. Phil tells her it doesn't matter anymore and that the entire world is a parking spot. To prove his point, he suddenly accelerates and drives the car straight into the store, saying this feels even better. However, Carol argues that if rules don't matter anymore, then burning down a church wouldn't be far off. Clearly fed up, Phil decides to reverse the car and park it in the parking spot. At night, Phil vents to his ball friends about Carol, going on about how annoying she is, and how despite being extremely horny, he has absolutely no interest in having sex with her. The next day, Phil sees Carol standing in front of his house with all her supplies. He rushes out shouting, and asks her what she's doing. Carol tells him she's moving into the house next door. Phil tries to convince her that there are plenty of houses in the city and she doesn't have to live right next to him. Carol asks if he does weird stuff in his house or if he's just scared she might see him naked. To prove a point, Phil suddenly pulls down his underwear, before awkwardly pulling it right back up. Being a religious person, Carol then suggests that they might be the chosen ones and that it's their responsibility to repopulate the world. Phil immediately shuts it down, saying he wouldn't have sex with her even if she were the last person on Earth. Carol says she doesn't want to have sex with him either, and that it would be as difficult for her as eating her own cat, but she's only considering it because the fate of humanity depends on them. But Phil clearly doesn't care and just walks away. The next morning, Phil is taking a dump when Carol suddenly shows up right in front of him. Annoyed, Phil asks for some privacy. Carol tells him if he wants privacy, he should be using a toilet instead of a pool. She then asks for his help fixing the water pipes so she can grow fresh food in her garden, but Phil refuses to help her at all. So to tease him, Carol takes out a fresh tomato and starts eating it right in front of him before casually walking away. At night, Phil sneaks into Carol's garden and eats all the tomatoes. The next morning, when Carol confronts him about it, Phil, with tomato stains all over his beard and shirt, blatantly lies that he didn't eat any. He then notices that Carol has injured her leg and asks about it. She tells him she dropped a manhole cover on it while trying to fix the pipes, which makes Phil start to feel a bit guilty. The next day, as Phil is passing by Carol's house, he sees her using her pool as a toilet. Confused, he asks what she's doing. Carol tells him she's given up on the water project and everything else. Phil says it's her garden, but Carol tells him it's also a parking spot, making Phil feel even more guilty, realizing he's the reason she gave up. Phil decides to fix the pipes, and after a lot of struggle and failures, he finally manages to do it. The next morning, Carol confronts Phil again, asking about the makeshift irrigation system in her garden. Phil once again denies doing any of it, but Carol, knowing damn well he was behind it, invites him over for dinner. At dinner, Carol once again suggests that they sleep together to save the human race. Phil reluctantly agrees and tries to excuse himself to go wash his balls first, but Carol tells him she won't have sex with him without marriage. Phil thinks she's crazy and questions why it even matters, but Carol says she doesn't want her kids to be bastards. With no other option and horny for sex, Phil is forced to get down on one knee and propose to Carol with a forced excitement. At night, Phil dreams that he's getting married to Carol, and as they walk out of the church, a crowd of people is celebrating them, which suddenly wakes him up. Just then, Carol shows up at his house with a special dinner of raisin ball spaghetti. She tells Phil she'll handle the whole shebang for the wedding, and all he has to do is take care of the rings. The next day, Phil celebrates his bachelor party with his ball friends by burning a pyramid of toilet paper with a flamethrower and doing all kinds of stupid things. Carol calls to ask if he got the rings yet, and Phil casually says not yet because he's been really busy, not realizing that Carol is watching him from a distance. After that, Phil goes to see his mannequin crush one last time to express his feelings and tell her he's getting married, before heading to the church for the wedding. Carol is really excited for the wedding and makes an entry wearing a beautiful veil. However, Phil completely forgets to bring the rings. This breaks Carol's heart, because she put together the entire wedding, and Phil couldn't even manage one simple thing. Hurt and disappointed, she leaves the wedding in her decorated car. Phil goes after Carol to make things right, but she doesn't open the door no matter how much he knocks, so Phil ends up breaking it open with a hammer. As he walks in, he sees how beautifully Carol has decorated the entire house for the wedding. There's even a cake with little figurines of him and Carol on top. He then finds her sitting in a dark room, clutching pillows. Phil walks up to her and tells her that she drives him crazy. She doesn't get his jokes, she corrects his grammar, and she talks incessantly, annoying the hell out of him. But then he admits that he was genuinely worried about her when she left. He says he'd rather eat raisin balls, help her plant the seeds, and live in a world where he has to deal with her tendencies than go back to living alone. Carol is moved by Phil's words and agrees to go with him. They drive to a jewelry store, where Phil puts a bunch of rings on her fingers, and then they head back to the church and finally get married. That night, Carol pulls Phil into the bedroom, and Phil finally gets what he's been begging God for months. Phil doesn't enjoy her company much, but at the end of the day, he's getting sex. From the next day on, Carol joins in on Phil's madness, and the two of them start doing all the stupid things Phil used to do alone, like wearing a fire suit while Carol shoots a flamethrower at him, crushing cans with road rollers, and even visiting his mannequin crush, which Carol quickly smashes to pieces out of jealousy. While driving back home, Phil admits that this whole marriage thing is actually pretty tolerable, something he once thought would be a complete disaster. However, a car suddenly appears at the intersection, and Phil crashes straight into it. He quickly jumps out to check, only to see a beautiful woman stepping out of the car. Phil is completely stunned by her beauty, just standing there staring, while the new girl helps Carol get out of the car. Desperate, Phil quickly slides into the front seat so he can sit next to her, leaving Carol in the back. She introduces herself as Melissa and says she came here after seeing the Alive in Tucson billboards, and has been wandering around the city for the past 2 weeks. Phil instantly regrets marrying Carol, who casually tells Melissa that if she had shown up just a day earlier, she could have attended their wedding. Phil immediately feels uncomfortable because he doesn't want Melissa to know he's married to Carol. But Carol keeps yapping, telling Melissa that they're trying to have a baby. When they reach home, Melissa notices all the expensive paintings on the walls. Carol tells her that Phil stole them all, but Melissa shrugs it off, saying if it's really even stealing when no one else is left. Phil keeps trying to flirt with Melissa, putting on a deep voice, but Carol ruins it by warning Melissa not to swim in the pool since Phil used to take dumps in it before she arrived. Phil then offers Melissa a place to stay, saying it might be better in case she has a concussion, but she insists she's fine. Before leaving, she says she's really happy to have found them, because she thought she'd never see another human again. Hearing that, Carol pulls her into a hug, and Phil quickly joins in, using it as an excuse to get close to Melissa. Later on, while Melissa and Carol are cooking dinner, Phil shows up all dressed up, having shaved off his beard to impress Melissa. Both Carol and Melissa are surprised to see him like this, but his plan backfires when Melissa tells him she actually liked the beard and that now he looks smaller and weaker. Carol immediately agrees with her. Even during dinner, Phil keeps trying to crack jokes to make Melissa laugh, but everything comes out awkward. Carol asks Melissa if she was married in the old world. Melissa says she was once married to a jerk named Greg who cheated on her, and she makes it clear that she hates people who cheat on their wives before walking away. After dinner, Carol asks Phil if he's attracted to Melissa, and Phil straight up lies and says no. Phil becomes so obsessed with Melissa that he even starts dreaming about her at night. The next morning, when she walks into his house, Phil is busy doing bench presses, trying to appear tough in front of her. Melissa calls him outside and asks about the newly decorated car parked in front of her house. Phil tells her it's just a small gift because he felt bad for crashing her limo. At that moment, Carol shouts from her house, calling Phil over. She's upset that he has time to buy Melissa a car but not to fix the door he broke on their wedding day. Phil tells her to just move to another house, but Carol argues that when something is broken, you don't just throw it away, you fix it. Left with no option, Phil promises to repair her door. Later on, Carol shows Melissa her marriage album, filled with illustrations of her and Phil. Melissa finds it sweet but asks why, if they're married, they don't live in the same house. Carol explains that they didn't really get married out of love, but to repopulate the world, and that Phil just likes having his own space. Meanwhile, Phil is outside fixing the door when Melissa walks up to him. In an attempt to look tough, he ends up smashing his own thumb with a hammer. Melissa invites him over for some chilled beer with her and Carol that evening, mentioning that she managed to get her refrigerator working using a generator. However, in the evening, Phil tells Melissa that Carol won't be coming because she has diarrhea. Completely alone with each other, Melissa asks if she can confess something. Phil immediately gets excited and tells her she can say anything. Melissa tells him that when she first met them, she instantly liked Carol, but felt a bit unsure about him. There was something off, a weird energy she couldn't quite place. But after talking to Carol and hearing more about his situation, she realized she might have misjudged him and she apologizes for that. Hearing this, Phil awkwardly tries to laugh it off, feeling a bit disappointed. Still reeking of desperation, he quickly asks if she wants more beer, clearly hoping she gets drunk. Melissa then opens up, admitting she's been completely alone for 2 years and feels extremely lonely and horny, even saying she'd sacrifice her right hand just to make out with a guy. Phil's jaw drops instantly. He tries to slide in by sympathizing with her, hoping to turn things in his favor, but Melissa cuts him off, saying she's genuinely happy that he and Carol found each other and that she respects their boundaries. Disappointed, Phil goes to Carol to talk about their marriage. However, Carol shows him a decorated heart-shaped nameplate she made that reads Home of Carol Pilbasian Miller. She says she'll put it on her door the day Phil finally fixes it, and that she believes in him. Seeing how much Carol is putting into their marriage, Phil can't bring himself to say what he came to say and leaves. Meanwhile, in the next scene, we see a guy in a Ferrari who stops by the Alive in Tucson billboard before speeding off toward the city. At the same time, the group is having a good time, drinking and gossiping at night. As Carol steps away to get more drinks, Melissa tells Phil she's really embarrassed about what she said the previous night and blames it on the alcohol. She makes him promise not to tell Carol, worried it might give her the wrong idea and affect their friendship. Soon after, Carol pulls Phil into a room to get intimate. Phil, clearly uninterested, asks if she's really sure about the whole repopulation thing. Carol confidently says yes and that she wants as many babies as possible. That's when Phil realizes something. He goes to his ball friends and tells them that if they're going to repopulate the world, there need to be at least 2 women having babies at the same time, because children from just him and Carol can't be with each other. After that, he puts on an emotional act, almost tearing up, and explains the same logic to Carol, saying he loves her so much, but for the sake of repopulating the world, he might also need to sleep with Melissa. Carol immediately sees through his drama and calls him out, saying he just wants to sleep with Melissa. Phil denies it, saying it's only about making sure their future kids don't end up sleeping with each other, and that Melissa is also horny, so she probably wouldn't have a problem with it anyway. Carol then asks how he knows Melissa is horny. Phil tries to cover it up, but it's already too obvious. Hurt and angry, Carol decides to end things with him. Soon after, Melissa knocks on Phil's door, furious that he told Carol their secret after promising he wouldn't. She berates him for ruining her one chance at having a girlfriend, saying now Carol hates her because of him. Phil tries to explain himself, but Melissa calls him a dick and walks away. At night, Phil tries to win both of them back by apologizing through a megaphone and creating drama all night. Meanwhile, Melissa walks up to Carol's house and says she wants to talk. Carol asks her if she wants to talk about her horniness. Melissa tells her that the only thing she's horny for is their friendship and even brings a Prosecco bottle to revive their friendship. Hearing that, Carol lets her in. Meanwhile, Phil gets tired of shouting into the megaphone all night and decides to give up. That's when Carol and Melissa show up, saying they need to talk. They sit him down in front of them, and Carol tells him that she and Melissa had a long talk and decided that Phil should sleep with Melissa for the sake of repopulating the world. However, before Phil gets too excited, Carol lays down some strict rules. He can only sleep with Melissa 3 times a month, strictly for repopulation purposes, and on those days, sex can occur a maximum of 3 times a day. And once Melissa is pregnant, Phil isn't allowed to have any kind of physical contact with her.
And that includes sex.
Yes.
Even though Phil isn't completely satisfied with the amount of sex he's allowed, he's still pretty happy. Trying to contain his excitement, he excuses himself, runs back to his house, and screams into his pillow. The next day, Carol comes over to Phil's house and gives him some energy peanuts since it's the day he's supposed to procreate with Melissa. However, Carol tells him that his time with Melissa shouldn't be fun, and that he should save all the fun for his wife. Phil assures her it's just a job for him, nothing more than that, before walking out. Meanwhile, Phil takes Melissa to a special spot, setting up a bed out in the open and decorating the whole place with lamp lights and flowers. Melissa objects that this isn't supposed to be romantic, but Phil just shushes her by popping a chocolate into her mouth. Even then, Melissa starts feeling a bit guilty, but cutting through his BS, she leans in and starts kissing him. Phil stops her, saying he wants to make it more special. He begins playing the guitar and sets off rockets into the sky, which catches the attention of the guy in the Ferrari, who immediately heads in that direction. Just as Phil and Melissa are about to make love, the Ferrari pulls up. To their surprise, a fat man steps out and introduces himself as Todd. To find out what happens next, make sure to like the video. Let's aim for 500 likes. Till then, take care and goodbye.